There you are. I went full screen. All right. Boom, 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 boom.
فوقه.
Huh?
فوقه. I read somewhere إنه if you have like a more focused screen instead of going full screen, خصوصا إذا مقربة على الكاميرا تبعك, you have less places for your eyes to wander. So شوي بتضلك more focused. This is why I avoid going full screen whenever I'm interviewing.
I see. I look right between your eyebrows.
فهمت, بس قصدي if you on my screen are like big on the whole screen, if I'm trying to get all of the cues, so بصير بتطلع بكذا محل بيبين الفرق على الجاز.
Let me just make sure. Yeah, I think I got your eyebrows locked. Yes. Just want to make sure that your eyebrows don't move that way, right?
I try.
You know we've already started recording, so.
Okay. رح تترك هاي الشيء على تمك.
أكيد.
حلو. My inner scientist would like to just like record and I do not approve.
So Elia, since you are a scientist, can you tell me why this is not appropriate for a podcast episode?
It's not appropriate for most things, not just a podcast episode.
But this is a makeshift mask.
No, a makeshift mask should be tighter, protect additional areas, be made out of cotton. This doesn't work.
Maybe that's better. That's better. Much better. You know, it's good that this disease doesn't, I mean, you don't need to be blindfolded. You just need to, you know.
Okay. It's getting to our brains, I think.
How have you been the last 3 months?
It's been an interesting roller coaster. I landed here in Montreal end of January. I had a very interesting couple of weeks and then moved into a new neighborhood. I never lived here specifically.
You were living in Montreal before we met. I mean, before
yes. Yes,
so
but not in this specific neighborhood.
Yeah.
So getting to know the grocery stores and all of that. But like a couple of weeks in, we had to start with the physical distancing.
Yeah.
So it's been a journey.
You know, I thought today I had like the last month, every day I've had a lot of time to think. I think all of us have time to just sit down and reflect. There are a few people I know that have had this kind of situation. They were in Beirut in a very intense moment. A lot of social cohesion, a lot of packed areas, hundreds of thousands, at times millions of people out on the streets throughout the country. And then the complete opposite, social distancing. In other words, rest, quiet, as opposed to sort of euphoria and celebration. And it's really the polar opposite. And I was thinking today that maybe both societies need a bit of each. And then I thought, we saw, we're going to get into this, of course, but we both saw Lebanon sort of come back to life, almost like emerging from a coma. And then we're both witnessing different cities. I'm in New York, you're in Montreal. We're witnessing cities that are usually buzzing, especially New York. New York, I mean, that old cheesy saying, I mean, New York is asleep at the moment. It is asleep. And for the right reasons. I mean, it's dangerous to not be at home and distancing. And this society is sort of taking a break, taking a step back. And in a way, I think we're fortunate because we're able to see these things chronologically. We left Beirut in January. I left late January as well. We both arrive to this part of the world, and then out of nowhere, we're locked indoors. So I really wanted to talk to you because I just keep thinking back at how energetic those months were in Beirut and how quiet these months have been. And out of a necessity to have some human contact indoors, I'm doing this on video. After 100 some episodes of audio only, I gave up. I need to see the people I'm talking to. And I'm glad you said yes. So I just want your kind of experience in that back and forth. And I know that this is a short to medium term situation. I know that we're not going to live with COVID-19 forever. I know that this is sort of temporary. And I know that the protests in Lebanon most likely will resume, or the demands will resume. That's not a closed chapter. So that story is probably going to keep going, and we'll both be thinking about that one probably more down the road. But just your sort of your own personal take on that one end of the spectrum to the other. And let me take off this blindfold so it doesn't look so silly. I didn't realize I was strangling myself. Yeah.
I don't know. It seems right now so far away in time, but definitely there was a lot of people on the streets, a lot of movement. We were barely sleeping, just trying to cover the stories. We were lucky enough to hear so many. And I know you agree with the fact that we also heard a sentiment saying we can't stay on the streets forever. We need to work because life goes on, we need a paycheck, we need to pay for our existence, whether at home or on the street. So that was a sentiment that existed maybe before Christmas. Like I could hear those thoughts, especially for those who've been sleeping in tents, who got laid off. It was a thing to think about, but it wasn't super obvious, let's say, or super urgent. Afterwards, with this whole moving here, I kept in touch with a lot of people I've met, also a lot of people who are documenting it. So for example, a lot of photographers. I know I used some of their material while I was explaining some of the Thawra moments to students here in the journalism department.
These are people you met in Montreal?
No, so I know of their work because of Thawra. But I needed like a visual illustration of the podcast and what really happened in Thawra. So I used their material. And following them, I've seen the pictures of crowds, interaction, and now they're documenting the empty streets because, as you know, journalists are still allowed to go out. And it's just haunting, just scrolling through my feed, looking at their work now.
I didn't know journalists still have permission to be out on the streets in Beirut.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you follow them and just look at the pictures they're taking, it's haunting. Like you see, the ring is completely deserted.
Yeah.
Scenes we weren't used to. Even on the off days, even on the rainy days, even on the shitty days, it was never that deserted. So that transition, also documented through social media, is very, very haunting. One other thing is also how different people's concerns are here versus back in Lebanon. So I know that the Canadian government is issuing aid for most people who are affected by the situation, who lost their jobs, etc., etc. So people's concerns here are very valid with respect to how the economy is going to progress, what their government is doing. But it also reminds me of how this problem is tenfold, if not more, back in Lebanon. Most people literally have nothing to go back to. It's not something that will pass.
Yeah.
It's something that's on top of a million other problems. So also contrasting the two situations, how people here have access to a free press, people who are also interrogating what the government is doing, not just criticizing for the sake of criticizing, but actually through numbers, documenting what's happening, versus back home where it's a bit lacking.
Yeah.
It's something to think about.
I mean, it couldn't have come at a worse time. I mean, it's the economy had already been, the economy crashed even before the protests started. And then you have that sort of, things were so bad in January regardless. and people's patience really being tested there. And then, I mean, it's, you can't imagine these things, right? October 17 was impossible to imagine. And then 3 months later, 4 months later, a global pandemic. It's just impossible to forecast these things.
Even within the span of the last 2 months. So I remember when I left, my parents and I were talking about how we might figure out a way to transfer money here, at least for me, because all international transfers have stopped.
Yeah.
Now our main conversation on a daily basis is how they shouldn't be touching their money. Whatever they withdrew, they just keep keep back in Beirut. The whole conversation about money is different. It's one of the first times in my life where I hear my mom is watching where she shops and what she shops for. It's mind-blowing how fast the change is happening, especially like fuel prices are still higher than market rates. It's just insane. It's just insane.
But can you tell me a bit about your own experience on that? Because this is something that you can say as much as you want. In terms of the cash transfers, I mean, they were already an issue before both of us left Beirut. But just your own situation, I mean, what are the mechanisms for you to still sort of be comfortable enough in Montreal? Because I know that it's only maybe 2 or 3 days ago that the withdrawals for accounts, I think less than, I forget the exact figure, was it $3,000?
Yeah, $3K. Yeah.
Yeah, that you could withdraw in lira at market rate there.
Yep.
But are you able to, I mean, how are you managing in a personal way on that stuff? Because I think that is many Lebanese in the diaspora that are stuck outside are in that situation.
Yeah, at least the ones who either depended on their parents for support, or in my case, who depended on the fact that I would be graduating soon and getting my work permit. So the thing is, hopefully most of us in my class are graduating now, which would allow us to be full-time workers. Now I can only work part-time because I'm a student.
Right.
So this whole situation, along with not being able to transfer from Lebanon, and honestly, even if I could transfer from Lebanon, I'm telling my parents to just keep it. Transfer nothing. They're going to be needing it way more than I am, because I expect to enter the job market way before anything. So you're able.
Your personal income is Canadian at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're making ends meet with a Canadian salary part-time.
Yep.
Because of visa restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, can you describe just your day-to-day situation in Montreal? And I think a lot of us have sort of similarities here, but I mean, are you more inclined to pretend to cook now because we can't simply just order food regularly without spending all our savings? I mean, are you how are you dealing with it?
Okay, so just an FYI, this is officially my 28th day in physical distancing. Yeah. So which means I go out maybe once a week to get my groceries.
So you're leaving your apartment only once a week?
Yeah.
So pretty much 7 days in a row you're indoors?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just to compare, I spent 1 full week as well indoors, and I think I almost lost my mind.
It definitely affects it, which is a daily challenge. I'm currently sharing how I'm coping with it on social media and all of that, hoping to inspire and maybe get inspired, depending on what I see there. But it definitely made me reflect on my spending and other habits that I used as proxies to stay sane. So I would regularly order out. I would regularly just buy stuff on Amazon. Now, even if I could buy stuff on Amazon, why would I put someone's life at risk just to get like a new set of coloring pens? It makes no sense.
No, that's true,
currently, before we started this recording, we experimented with a new form of popcorn, and that is adding oregano to it with salt. It's actually not bad.
Oh, so you're doing it
Yes.
The real popcorn. You remind me of my childhood. This is pre-microwave popcorn. You're just doing the kernels and okay. I hope you're keeping that lid on so it doesn't.
You learn.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I like these sort of, and in a way, it's like playful examples of how people are just dealing with this. Because it's not just isolation. It's not just social distancing. It's confinement. I mean, we're staying in the same place. It's not like we're moving from place to place. I think it'd be very different if we were literally able to go from one location to the other, staying inside. But that's not what's happening. We're indoors in our homes all the time. And you have a roommate. So I'm guessing even that relationship is being tested, probably to a point that you have to kind of be careful not to get on each other's nerves too much. And
yes, definitely.
But
she's very patient so far.
She's patient. Okay, that's good. That's
very
good.
Much, yeah.
Because I'm guessing she would be the one who needs to be more patient in that relationship.
Definitely. Because I'm definitely louder. I talk with my parents, with many people every day. So she has to listen to that because it's not the biggest house in the world. But yeah, she's very patient, and hopefully it's going well so far.
Does she know about your previous 3 months in Beirut? Does she sort of have the backstory to what you were doing there?
We talked about it, but I don't know how not to burden people with it, though. Mm-hmm. Like, I talk about it as an interesting journalistic experience, but I also know when to draw a limit how personal you get in that conversation, because it definitely affected me a lot. It affected and still affects how I see the world here, how I see the situation in Beirut, how I talk to my friends, the connections I made there when I talk to them with my 7-hour difference. It affects many things. So yeah, she knows of it, but I don't think I want to even go into a more emotional experience, because I don't think I'm emotionally stable at this point to discuss that.
No, but I ask you because I think that's a situation that both of us know intimately. You probably even more so, because you spend day after day after day after day after day after day in Martyrs Square in downtown. So I know, because I know the location and I spent enough time with you there to have an idea of what you were doing. But you come back, or you leave, and that's something very difficult to explain, especially if someone maybe caught it by chance on the news or maybe social media. Yeah. Even Lebanese abroad that participated their way abroad, still, it did not sort of get the full picture, I think. I think you had to have been there to really embrace it and experience it. That said, this thing that we're all dealing with is something I don't think we'll ever need to explain, because it's not a confined story. I mean, this is a global story. And I think this is very, very strange to have an issue that you don't need. There will be no storyteller, or if there are storytellers for COVID-19, I mean, I think it'll be a long time, because it's something that we all dealt with together. It's not like, the Paris experience versus the Montreal versus the Beirut. Maybe some cities are harder, like New York. New York is the epicenter for COVID, but we're all in it together, and I think that's something quite special. Connectivity, which is something we talked about many times, online, sort of sharing a story is one thing, but this is real life, and we're all in it together. And I've been thinking through that this is, I don't remember another experience like this, where the whole world kind of embraces.
Definitely not in my memory. So it's very unique, and hopefully I'm trying to encourage as many people as I can to keep notes about their thoughts, their feelings, even external things, like what are their feelings on how it's being documented, how it's being portrayed in the media, how artists are trying to keep us all entertained with, live concerts, if they're feeling productive, if they're feeling pressure to be productive. It's a lot that's going on. So I hope, as storytellers and even as regular people, just keep notes, because you might remember it differently after a while. So those notes will definitely be handy. So hopefully people are keeping notes.
And, in your own sort of estimate, what are those differences? Is it that it's literally harder to be outside in some areas than others? I mean, what are those sort of, is it cultural that some countries were not taking it seriously early on? I mean, a classic example is America was really late to the game, and at least sort of tackling it head on. Well, what are those differences to you?
In the country's responses, it definitely has to do with their deference to scientific authority. That's how I would phrase it. If
Which is
they
what
already...
you're kind of, this is your expertise. It's not Lebanese politics or economics. It's this issue. Yeah.
Yes. So for those of you who don't know, I'm a science journalist. I'm currently finishing my master's in that. And yes, I genuinely think any action needs money, right? Anything you need to do in the world, breathing included, requires the money.
Breathing?
And money, yes. So you need to breathe. You need to be in a situation that's healthy. You can't be underground breathing. You need basics. Money powers that. If you want to power specific action, you need to allocate the budget for it. If specific governments have not allocated that budget or responded differently, were more iffy about spending or procuring material, that has to do with how much they trust their scientists and policymakers ahead of time. So it's not surprising to see how countries have fared so far. It also has to do with democracy and how early things are actually revealed. Right. So it's, I think, a combination of deference to scientific authority and how transparent each society is.
So that's more on the state level, sort of taking it, or less to do with population reaction, I'm guessing, to that.
I don't think there's a lot that has to do with cultural change, for example. Like, there are some bits, but I think they can be overridden by bigger actions. So, for example, Quebec is now leading in social distancing in the whole of North America.
Yeah, I saw,
according to the Google Analytics.
I wanted to I saw that on the news. I'm like, I don't remember Quebec being that, outside of Montreal, it is a fairly social distancing is taken for granted.
Yeah.
And a lot of,
maybe that's cultural in a way, but it's nothing that cannot be enforced, even if your population is not, let's say, culturally primed to do that or culturally accepting of that. You don't have to do it the way the Chinese did it. There's a million ways to nudge people into social distancing and physical distancing. For example, like in my local supermarket, when you walk in, the whole path, there's like lines 2 meters away, and each aisle has a direction. Yeah. They thought things through.
Same thing here in New York, and it was overnight. There are markers for. I think it's 2 meters at least per. Just
be creative and be clear with your population, because, like, I remember here in the early days, we didn't really know where to go and get tested if you had a symptom. Yeah. We didn't really know what to expect if you were to go into a hospital, but that was soon remedied. Yeah. However, in my parents' case, they still don't know, and the test is still not for free. So what's the incentive to nudge people to social distance if they lack the basic knowledge? It's a matter of infrastructure. I think this overrides any cultural differences.
And the infrastructure was not there because this was not something that was thought through.
Budget for it.
It's budget, so it's a money thing. It's money.
I think so. I think so.
Yeah.
I genuinely think so. You want to make tests for free? That's a money thing. You want to open new testing centers? That's a money thing. Right. You want to enforce, like in our case in Montreal, there's been like 1,000 tickets given for those who are not social distancing. You need money to pay those officers to go and do that.
Okay, so I get your point that administration and government and healthcare and all these things related to science is what's at stake. And have you had any symptoms yourself did you think that maybe, I mean, I know this affects different people in different way. I know that the younger crowd may get it without realizing it, but just yourself, were you sick the last weeks?
No, but I know in the household we were a bit worried. So my flatmate before a couple of weeks. She used to work at the airport. She used to welcome passengers as they landed. So we were concerned because she was at a high-risk position. Some of the airlines were not providing enough protective equipment. So it was a thing. We were always monitoring, always very wary of that. But so far, it's been good.
Good. And, back in February, I was tired.
Yeah.
And I assumed it's just fatigue. But I think everyone that has had some variation of the symptoms now thinks that they had COVID-19. And I'm pretty sure I did not have it. But then I was thinking that, I would not want to trouble the hospital down the street here, or for that matter, bothering the sort of the whole sector, because I think, I'm wrong, that I'm young enough and healthy enough that I would outride it if I were to get it. But then, surprisingly, you see sort of all this other information that you get very sick if you're young. At times, younger people have died from this. Older people have survived. I think today, a 103-year-old woman made it through, and she came out okay. So that's, maybe good that's news. The tail end, and that's good news. But I just sort of always think that I'm healthy enough to sort of take it in, and I probably am. But it shows like a naive sort of. It's an ill-informed judgment I'm making as somebody who's not in the medical field, someone who does not have a scientific background, just assuming that it's just a very harsh flu, whatever, but it's more than that. And I don't know. I been reading about the Spanish flu, World War I, and how it impacted the Middle East, and that's of course different. That's a famine. That's sort of was a very deadly experience in many parts of the world, but particularly in the Middle East. And I came across an article that said that very little has been written about the Spanish flu afterwards. And part of the reason is it's that the human condition sort of took a wrong turn. And people were maybe a bit ashamed of how they handled it back then. And I'm wondering now, in your eyes, are you impressed with the way people are handling this in 2020? A global pandemic, sort of social distancing is at least tried in many cases. People are celebrating the healthcare workers, the first responders, all that stuff. Are you impressed, or are you kind of saying that? Do you think the opposite, that we're not handling it the right way?
Okay. Do you want my actual opinion?
Yeah, of course. I don't want your BS opinion. I want the real opinion.
I'm insanely frustrated with how we're dealing with it. Very, very frustrated, because again, everyone looks at this situation based on their background, their training, what they like to do in life, right? In my case, I'm a science communicator, and every day I see how we failed as communicators to get some very, very basic points across. So whether how it comes to masks, what viruses do, what the numbers mean, the deluge of numbers, people cannot make sense of it. I can barely make sense of it. So we haven't done a good job in communicating what diseases are. And I genuinely am afraid if such a scenario were to repeat itself and it's actually airborne, because now it's not, at least in droplets, it's not really like malaria.
Right.
It's not proper airborne, let me use that phrase, or it's not engineered. Like, we're so unprepared, and the policy papers were there for ages preparing us and warning us of such conditions that might be an actual threat. And I genuinely think no one took them seriously. I don't think we're ready for for a disease that's deadlier or that transmits more virulently. So no, I'm not at all happy with how we're dealing with it.
Now, I know that you're not a coronavirus expert. I know that, and I know that you're not a sort of. I'm not going to assume that you're.
Yeah.
I'll ask you the most general, because I know that you have sort of a background in the subject, but maybe COVID-19 is not your thing. These wet markets in China that. Every few years, it's kind of like a repeated issue.
Mm-hmm.
Is it sort of simple in the sense that you need to shut down these markets or is it something that and I ask you in a sort of in a wider way. You're seeing something unusual now, which is an embracing of borders. I say unusual because the usual level is already problematic, but now it's sort of
I'm officially locked in. I cannot leave. So yeah.
You're not. Yeah, you mean locked in your home and locked in Canada too.
In Canada.
Yeah. And
like I can leave, but I can't come back. So.
Right, and maybe this is sort of worth sharing that we both had planned on doing several talks and maybe going to a relative wedding. That I mean, so yeah, of course, meeting in general is impossible, or very difficult. But I mean, borders in the sense that, I mean, it is. I think there's a popular will to maybe step back from connectivity and real cooperation and maybe look inwards. America had trends of it already. Canada has not had that situation, but obviously the UK, countries in Europe are dealing with it. And our part of the world has never really been one for interconnectivity among neighboring countries. So maybe that's the norm there. And the neighborhood is already problematic. But I mean, is it something that all of us have to work on together to make sure it doesn't happen again, or is it something that we know where this is coming from, and we know that for at least several weeks it was kind of hidden, and it's sort of a repeated issue from China. It's not coming from other areas as of now. That it's mostly coming from these wet markets and wildlife markets. Is it? I mean, how would you tackle that next round? And I say this, I mean, I'm very careful. I know you're a master's degree student in Montreal. You're not sort of Dr. Fauci on TV, sort of back and forth. You're not, I know that. So just from your own experience, your own reading on the subject, I mean, how would you improve the next response?
I love how you phrased it at the end, which is this is definitely a problem that needs to be tackled together as an international community, while also understanding that we know where it's coming from. Both do not negate each other.
Right.
So for people who are interested in that topic, I would highly recommend a couple of sources. One would be an explainer on Vox. You can find it on YouTube. So go to their channel, get to the wet market, and look at how they explain how that originated initially in China. We're talking years ago. And how they were actually shut down after SARS, and they opened again.
Right.
And this is exactly why I'm saying it's all about the money. They opened again because there was a lot of lobbying pushing for that opening, even though they knew where it started, a lot of lobbying pushing for it, etc. That's a really interesting take on Vox. They explain why those markets actually exist, and it's honestly fascinating.
I've seen this documentary, and it's I mean, it was the cat I forget the animal exactly that SARS is associated with, a certain type of cat. I forget the name now.
Cat rapper, yeah.
Yeah, and so you're right, it was shut down.
But it got reopened months later. It's not that it was a long-lasting decision.
But so I remember, I just interrupt you, sorry. I remember Vox sort of getting very deep into a Chinese law that and that it's about rewording a certain law. But is that really the issue, that it's just a
I'm
legal...
getting there.
Okay.
I'm getting there.
Yeah.
Because in that case, it was lobbying that pushed for it to be open again. But, and that I think was a Guardian article, if I'm not mistaken, that also talked about why is this even happening in China? Why are people going to such length? Why are they even exploring such options for food, etc.? And this also has to do with the global will to forever expand and develop and be more efficient. So that global supply chain relies on China being so efficient and destructive of its environment and going into jungles and whatever ecosystems that they have no business being in. Yeah. So it is an international dilemma, and we need to address it internationally. They will not stop doing it just because they feel like it. It's a whole market. So we know where it started, but the whole market needs to respond to it.
The whole market meaning what?
all of us consumers, we need to have a very honest conversation about
But
how we want to pick this up.
these animals are mostly consumed in China, right? It's not a global. I mean, there isn't a real demand for that. Is it? I forget the name now. That scaled animal that they think
Pangolin.
the bat infected and reached us.
Yeah.
What is
the
it called?
pangolin.
Pangolin. Pangolin?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's not really a delicacy outside of China.
It's not the animals themselves. It's the destruction of the environment of those animals because they need other resources. It's not the animals per se that are part of the global market. It's the resources, the byproducts of that, even though they are the actual product, that are pushing for further exploitation of environment. So it's a global conversation for sure.
Okay, so the global issue is less the actual human interaction with the animal in the market. It's got more to do with environmental policy.
100%.
Okay. Why aren't you on TV? I haven't really had it explained this way before.
You just need to read more science news.
Yeah, I think. Well, you know what? Fair point. I mean, Vox is not a science journal. It's not science. It's not scientific journalism.
Very true. Yeah.
Yeah, but that is probably the most important way to learn what's happening. It's the science route. I want to ask you, sort of, your science brain and looking at maybe able to dissect the issue and able to at least anticipate a response, or at least the way to tackle it next time. There's not much armchair pontification with science. There's more research, research experiments than sort of hot air back and forth, right? And that's what I do. You do the real stuff. I do the hot air stuff. I don't think God or religion or confession or all of these things that Lebanon knows best are going to save that country. And I know that in this part of the world, not enough people take science seriously, but enough do at the same time. Is it possible for us to actually fully embrace science in that part of the world at least, and not leave it to crooked sort of old ways?
Okay, so I will try to answer that as much as I can. And it's going to be two answers, honestly. First, to be clear, I'm pursuing science journalism, which is not science cheerleading. It's looking at science news and contextualizing it. Fine, science provides findings, results, whatever they are, but there's still an interpretation role to get it to a general audience. So hopefully this is where science journalists reside, and this is what I'm trying to do. When it comes to translating this endeavor back home, I genuinely think it's a matter of time. I have a lot of hope in that. Yeah. First, I'm going to give you an example that happened maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I think so. We had this debate. We were at Antwerp, a friend of mine and I organized this debate, and it was under the title of Science versus Religion, etc. It was more about like knowledge finding. So we announced it, like 100, 200 people were about to show up. And on that day, I definitely get death threats from people I don't know. I'm like, guys,
really? Just for that title?
Yes, we hadn't had the debate yet.
Yeah. So
it was a thing on that day. So that was 3 years ago. But now the more I think about how we have a responsibility of communicating science as well, that it was also our failure that might have led to that. So at least the reason, and that's my 10 cents on it, why I think a lot of people back home defer to God, religion, whatever it is, more often than others, is because they have so much mistrust in any other system that was provided for them, whether it's government, whether it was science experts, whatever it is. Among, at least I only see it with fellow Arabs, so hopefully that friend who told me this story will recognize herself. I was talking to her the other day, and she tells me that she's wearing gloves every time she goes out. Like, there's no need, hands are not a point of entry. You just go back home and you wash your hands, that's it. The point of entry is here. So worst case scenario, wear a mask. If you're really being extra cautious, and the reason why I'm wearing a mask is hopefully not to infect other people. That's the only thing I'm worried about.
Of course. Yeah.
So we were talking about the gloves, and she just looks back at me and she says, so let me ask you this question. If gloves were not necessary, why do physicians wear them in hospitals? And it took me a minute. All of my friends know this by now. I have a tendency to be very sarcastic, very blunt, very annoying, but I needed that second to think about it from a science communication perspective. And honestly, she has a mistrust. She's like, why do power or figures have that leisure and I don't? They have access to gloves and I don't. That was mostly her question. So I had to explain that if doctors didn't use gloves, they'd have to wash their hands almost 300 times a day and they wouldn't have time to see patients. So that link was not obvious. She was mostly thinking, at least that's my interpretation of it, that why do others get it and I don't? It's our mistrust of the power infrastructures that are around us as Arabs, as Lebanese, as whatever it is. We're always worried that someone is out to get us. Someone doesn't want our well-being first. It's a lack of, it's a mistrust, and it's partly on us as communicators.
Okay, but that's a fair point. Credibility lacks. I mean, there's just very little credibility there. But that wishing that, you can just wish this away and God will come and help you. I know that this is not only that part of the world. I know that. And it was equally upsetting to see Mike Pence holding a prayer to pray away the coronavirus. It's the same thing.
There was also that video, of the preacher who was yelling, asking Corona to get out. I'm sure you've seen it. It's gone viral. Even Lebanese and Arab comedians have picked up on it and made fun of him. It's a worldwide thing, definitely not just us.
Of course. And it would be silly to suggest that Lebanon stands out in that. No, there's many societies that, including this society here, there's too many people unwilling to look at science first. But since you said it, science communication, you have hope that part of the world will at least take science more seriously as credibility improves and other things?
I think they do because they don't have any other choice.
Yeah.
If you want to survive this, there's no other choice besides prayer. I'm going to keep this as an option. Then washing your hands, right?
Yeah.
Let's use all the weapons we can in fighting this. You want to have prayer as a weapon, have it. But I hopefully add more weapons to your defense line, right? So I think it's a matter of necessity, or else we're just gonna die. And if we don't have economists with their science, we're gonna go bankrupt even faster. So it's a matter of survival.
Well said. I am taking up a lot of your time because you are in the middle of a thesis, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you're you have more important things to do than talk to me. And I'm going to make this public. When you told me today you were in a good mood, I'm like, I have to do this, because when will this happen again?
Thank you for sharing with the world that I'm in a shitty mood most of my day.
Most of the time. So am I, which is why I think it was these things don't line up that often.
I know.
Also that, you reminded me a few weeks ago we were supposed to have a talk together. It didn't happen. We were supposed to go to the wedding together. It didn't happen. So, let's do it this way. Let's hang out through the podcast. I still think I'm very lucky that I met you in Beirut. And I'm going to, in the details box, I'll maybe, with your permission, maybe lay it out more in exactly what you do in terms of your studies. Sure. Not because it's much broader than just the Lebanese politics. I know that you have sort of a bigger story. So I'll include that. And Elia, I hope in the not too distant future we get to see each other, whether it's in New York or in Montreal, or for that matter in Beirut. And I'm glad you said yes to video. It's good to see you.
Oh, Oh, it's always great to see you.
And this is amateur, so if my eyes are not looking at you, it's my fault. I have no idea. I tried staying between the eyebrows, and I don't think I succeeded the whole way through. But
You got there.
we're getting there, yeah.
Yes.
Elia, thank you.
Thank you. عن جد that was fun.
It was good.
Yes. وأنا مربعة كل الوقت نمى الوجرية.
Like, I that question was so long and unfortunate. Like, I said it in such a long way. I'll clean it up شوي. Yeah, but no, it was very good. It was very.
طفي الضوء لأنه نوست. خير